everything happen? Like you came out from Iowa,
Yeah.
right? Are you from LA?
Born and raised.
Born and raised?
Yeah, John and I met like 11 years ago. His band was looking for a guitar player, and I think my older sister was friends with his kind of clique and put us in touch. And I joined John's first band called Long Lost in 2011, I want to say.
That's wild.
We did that band for a while, and then we did a hardcore band where I was a screamer and
Lesser?
John was the drummer.
Yeah.
Awesome. Dude.
Lesser.
So John is a drummer.
John's in everything.
Yeah,
he's a
everything,
producer, so he's
Yeah.
had to, and so we've made him do just about everything. And
That's
he was my drummer for a while.
That's amazing.
That project ended. He started Best Kept Secret with some other dudes, and
Yeah.
eventually like half of Best Kept Secret became his new project Point North, and they needed a guitar player, and I was the first person he reached out to, and they had one song, and that was the beginning of the band. And
Amazing.
I think at the time we didn't even have a drummer. It was just the studio that we were recording at, like our buddy Johnny Lou's studio. He was a drummer and just played on our first like EP.
Mhm.
And then we had another friend of ours like play our first couple shows. And that was really all that happened before, Sage kind of came into the picture there.
It's funny. My iteration with the band was, like I was saying, is I was living in Iowa and I messaged Best Kept Secret being like, hey, like, you guys need a drummer. Oh, the Reddit, no response. I think John probably read it.
I'm sure.
And then I was going to MI when I was 18, and I went back home for winter break, and I remember I was at a house show. It's a long story short, I was at a house show, and I was scrolling through Instagram, and I was looking on Instagram, and a friend of mine who's a drummer who lives in Minnesota posted a drum cover, and a band from LA commented and was like, we wish you lived in LA, we could use a drummer like you. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna message him, I live in LA. Went home, built his whole resume, sent it to him. When I came back as an 18-year-old, I remember meeting with them, and I started playing with them. This is band Quote Unquote. And then they were like, hey, we're gonna go record a new single in the studio with a friend of ours. Do you wanna track it? And I was like, yeah. And we showed up to Catacomb. And John was the engineer and producer there at Catacomb. And I love this story. I was 18 years old, and John had long blue hair. And I walked in, he didn't even say hello to me. He goes, you ever recorded in a studio before? And I was like, yeah. And I was just checking drums in that live room, and he was in the other room. And I remember I started tapping away, and I did the whole song in one take. And he left his talk back on. He turned to the guys I was in a band with and was like, I'm gonna steal this guy from you. So funny. And we traded info, and then he went away to work for Feldman for 6 or 7 months, and at the time I was 19, and then one day I got a random text from him. And he's like, hey man, like, how are you? And I'm like, oh, I'm good. He's like, are you playing in any bands? And I was like, no. I was playing like 7 bands at the time. And he was with Adam. And I was, basically I lied, and I was like, no, I'm not. I'm actually looking for work. Classic drummer hired gun story. And he's like, well, I'm starting up this project again called Point North, and we need a drummer. And would you be down to play? And I was like, oh, for sure. And then I went over to his place in Van Nuys, and I met Andy for the first time, and then as a 19-year-old. And then we went in, we put out Hammer. That was the first thing I ever did, was us putting out Hammer. And then we did Ghosts in My Home and Gasoline and what would become Retrograde. And I remember I found videos from Catacomb of me as a 19-year-old recording Gasoline. And I'm such, like, no tattoos, glasses on, like, scrawny little kid, playing Gasoline and Ghost in My Home. And it was so cool to look back now. And then, just like, we were just had no management, no booking agent. We were, like, in the thick of it, like a local band.
Well, the band, like, died. Like, it was like John was doing his producing. I was like about to graduate college.
Yeah.
And we just weren't doing it. And like right around that time, John recorded the cover of Hammer. Sage joined the band like within the week.
Yeah.
The song did really well.
It's super
and it
well,
was like, whoa, I think we have a band again.
Yeah.
That's amazing. You got to send me some of that footage.
Oh,
I want to insert it in
archived
here.
on my
Amazing.
Instagram. Yeah.
And when you were telling that story, I was really trying to think about the first time that like we sat down and played together, because I don't remember when that was.
I do. It was because we had gotten the As It Is tour,
Okay.
And we had an offer for we had no booking agent, no team really, and it was just us. And I remember we got an offer. I was in class, and As It Is was like, hey, like 1 of 4 or something.
Yeah.
And we're like, cool, we have a tour. Let's go
Yeah.
on tour. It's our first tour as a band. And I remember we were like, oh, we should see if we can play these songs.
Yeah.
So we went to AMP in North Hollywood,
Okay.
and in one of the smallest rooms.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
back when we were using like orange half stacks.
Oh yeah, I used to use tube amps and like cabs.
Yeah.
Like
We had
what?
the crazy road cases where you take the lids off and
Yeah.
then the brain
Yeah.
with the heads. Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
Well, and like running tracks off iTunes.
split left and right, click on left, and
Yeah,
then
dude, oh my god.
it was this whole thing. And then that was the first time we played together. I remember the first song we ever played together was Godspeed. I do remember that because I
believe
was
it.
playing and I'm like, oh, I've never played in a band like this. We were all so tight and it was so cool.
So it sounds like it happened pretty organically. Like you didn't
Yeah.
go into it being like, we're going to make a band and we're going to do X, Y, and Z. It was just kind of meeting. You came into the picture.
Yeah.
You guys recorded some stuff. Seemed like people liked it. How did you go about building your team then at that point? Did you get more
That
and more?
all came together at the same time.
Yeah.
Like it was like Sage, management, UTA,
Yeah.
Wow.
all within I want to say the span of like a month or two.
Yeah,
Wow.
it just
Yeah.
happened so fast, and I remember like we were like at the time like killing it for what we like what we were new to with like on Spotify, and we were going up like 15,000 followers, like listeners a day,
Yeah.
like on Spotify. And I remember just being in class and kids in my class who were trying to start bands were like noticing it. Like I remember we only had the one EP out, like we had Light in a Dark Place out, and I remember all these kids in my class were like, how are you guys doing it? Like what was happening? And I was like, I don't know. Like I just like we're just putting out good music. I think Gasoline was out and Ghost in My Home, and it was just doing so well and translating so well. And then we did that tour, and then we got with UTA, and then
Hopeless.
Hopeless, and then and then we were the next step was signing to a label.
which happened I think I want to say a month or two
so,
later.
So fast.
Yeah,
like,
this actually was from May
Yeah.
to October.
I remember
Wow,
I was
yeah.
playing because I was playing with Andy Black.
Yeah,
at
May
the
to
time,
October.
doing
So
Warped Tour. Yeah.
we went from no Sage, no Hammer, no nothing to Sage, booking agent, management,
label.
and label
Wow.
within the span of 5 months.
That's a lot. I mean, did you guys
And that's all the same team we have to this
Still
day.
to this
to
day.
this day?
To this
That-
day,
I was
yeah.
gonna say, like, through that, did you learn anything where you're like, okay, don't do this. Definitely make sure you do this. You know, obviously, when you get a team, there's a lot of new people in the mix. There's a lot of new creative ideas, but also direction.
It felt so good.
Yeah.
And again, I think the organicness to it was like really what
Yeah.
made it feel so right.
Yeah.
And then we had been through other labels and other management that like gave us a bad taste. And I think that brought us to the point before Sage joined where things were kind of dead.
yeah.
So it just went like full swing. Everything came together. It felt so right. And then as time continued and the band grew at an exponential rate and the tours went from a 1 of 4 from As It Is to a 1 of 3 with A Day to Remember. Like
Yeah.
it just everything year
Yeah.
after year, streams went up. And it's just like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
It was
So-
it was cool too because it was the team that we had gotten. It wasn't, and this is no diss to like newer managers, but it was like our management had done all these crazy people and dealt with way worse and made it happen, and our label had done some of our favorite bands, and with UTA, which is like a huge booking label, and also the coolest part too was like everyone from on our team had like been in it. Like our booking agent was in a touring guitarist in a hardcore band, and like it wasn't some suit coming in to like just take the spot and hope it works, you know. And I remember it's so funny because this was like when I joined the band, I was a 19-year-old kid who was in college and had nothing, like had no like was just so green-eyed to the world and excited, and and it's so cool. Like now when I go back and do like play with Bring Me or Alvarol or whoever it is, and when I sit and play Point North songs, it like takes me back to that like bright-eyed like kid, and like it's just so cool to see and to look around and have the same people around too. It's so like it's such a breath of fresh air, you know what I mean?
100%.
It's like a time capsule
Oh,
because all the
100%.
familiar faces like keep it so consistent
Yeah.
for us. But now it's like that was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And like it's so much has changed,
Yeah.
and so much is also the exact same. And I think that duality is amazing.
Yeah.
For us.
What's your favorite memory after all that happened? Like the moment of like, this is kind of happening. Like obviously, the song getting 15,000 additional viewers at that rate is incredible. Is there any special moment that stands out as a group where you guys were just like, yo, this is nuts?
For me, it was probably Big E, The Day to Remember.
Oh my God.
This was a crowd of 7,000 on that tour,
Yeah.
and it's just the biggest show that we had ever played to
Right.
date. And to this day, we've played festival slots that have had more people than that.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
as far as like a tour, people coming to see us and asking and A Day to Remember, to walk out onto that stage and like, this was our first tour back from COVID too. So we
Yeah.
had sat at home, like just hit the peak of, we had the whole team, right?
Yeah.
And like we had a Sleeping with Sirens tour where I think we started to get COVID on that tour in
we got COVID on that tour.
January. It
Yeah.
was January of 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like we did it. We had Into the Dark with Kellen came out, and it was like, wow.
Yeah.
And then COVID happened. We were just
Wow.
like, oh my god.
I think for me, kind of to elaborate on that, I think it was that period of time because the growth was happening so fast, and then we did the Sirens tour, and then COVID happened, and we're just like, we're still doing album one, and I remember we were kind of wondering like, because it's so hard when you can see it on the internet and you can see like Spotify numbers and streams, but it doesn't know how to translate live, and I feel like we went through COVID, and the first tour back was literally playing arenas with A Day to Remember. It's us, Asking Alexandria, and A Day to Remember. And I remember we were kind of like, all right, like let's see how this goes. And then we did the shows, and it was like the growth never stopped. And it was so crazy to see like. That was the tour I feel like for us we realized like, because we always think like, oh, in our heads we're still the band in the van and printing our own merch, and that tour was very much like, oh, it's not that at all. Like the like lines at merch to meet us, and like just like the people who know the songs, and like it's like the consistency of it too, I feel like was huge, and it was a huge turning point. We all kind of looked at each other and we're like, oh wow.
That's awesome.
I mean?
Yeah, it's like I think we finally felt like we had a seat at the table.
Yeah, 100%. And I think everyone on our team knew that too, and that's what felt good. And
What drove you guys to do it? What drove you to start playing music and be in a band to get to that point?
I never had any other choice. My parents put me in piano lessons, I think at 4.
yeah.
Wow.
I did my first talent show in first grade at 5, I think. And I just fell in love with it, and like I knew music was the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
It was either going to be music or basketball, and I figured I was like, I'm probably not going to make it in the NBA. But most of the musicians that I love kind of look like me, so
Yeah.
I think maybe I have a better shot at doing that, and just never stopped.
That's awesome.
And
yeah.
eventually played drums, and then I think guitar at around 10, and just sat in my room and played Green Day record and Rise Against record and Blink-182 record one after another. And
Yeah.
I was like, wait, these guys are all playing the same chords. Like, there's this formula here.
Yeah.
And I started to understand, like, wow, like it's not really hard to write a punk rock song.
No.
And so I was the 12-year-old kid that was writing the worst punk rock songs ever, but so was every punk band ever. Like, that's the beauty about punk music, is
Totally.
it's allowed to suck.
Yeah.
And sometimes the suckiest ones are like the best ones, you know?
But I think I was a huge skateboarder, and I remember at like 7, this sounds crazy, I started taking drums serious, like I'm gonna do this as a career at like 7 or 8.
That's crazy.
And I remember I was obsessed with hip hop. And my dad showed me Bring the Noise by Anthrax. And I remember I was like, whoa, this is so cool.
Yeah.
And then he showed me like Seven Dust and Limp Bizkit. And then I became obsessed with Descendants. And I think the Descendants, Milo Goes to College was the record that I learned front to back. And
Wow.
it was so cool. And yeah, it was like, and I started touring when I was 12 in a punk band because I just wanted to get out.
Yeah.
It was 12,
Yeah.
I wanted to get out, and I wanted to see the world, and I just didn't want to waste any time, and Yeah, I did Warped Tour the first time I was like 15.
That's sick.
I think every band needs to go through
Oh, yeah.
slumming it out 8 people deep in a 15-passenger van,
Yeah.
like with the tube amps.
Dude.
Like every band has to do that, but also you want to outgrow that pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And like my first tour was in an E350. And my third tour was in a bandwagon.
Yeah.
So that's what you want. You want the growth pretty
Yeah.
quickly, but you still want to be able to come from your humble
Yeah,
roots.
for
And
sure.
all of us, from me to Sage to John, like we've played shows in front of 6 people. And it's important. It's important to go through that, because when that starts to change, it means absolutely everything to you.
100%.
And as a band that's always had their own fingerprints on every single move they've ever made,
Yeah.
that's never stopped.
Yeah.
And we've found a team that supports that. And like that's the best thing, is they've created this vehicle for us
Yeah.
to continue to be exactly the same people that we've always been. We just are doing it at the level that we've always wanted to do it.
With what you started with SJC, like for my generation, like being 25 and growing up in the age of like when you guys were first coming up, like you created something that like inspired so many people. Like I wanted to be a better drummer to make it seem like I was cool enough to play SJC drums.
That's crazy.
And I remember like I would go see my favorite bands playing SJC, and I was like, see, when you say like you may not have been in the band, but like you did something that was way more impactful than to the whole drumming community, to like create something that was like it inspired people to be better. Because I was one of those kids, and here I am today, and it's
Dude,
so wild.
that means a lot.
Yeah.
Cool.
man.
Thank you so much, you
Yeah,
guys.
of
Have an
course,
awesome
dude.
day.
Of course, man.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.